High in the arc of heaven, a thunderbolt seemed to be lurking. There, up in bright Gladseem, in the halls of the mighty Thunder God, brother of Odin, stander with him at the beginning of time, Thor. Thor fretted, and Thor thought, and Thor fumed. For Thor had heard a prophecy given to Odin by the Sibyl herself, given to Odin by the Norns themselves, and confirmed by Mimir, that Thor would make do that folly of his youth when he tossed the child of Loki into the tumult and the water. He would make do and fight again that creature who he had lightly tossed away, and now bounded the earth, the Midgard serpent, who, inheritors of Ymir's guts, that Thor had also thrown away in some previous time. That creature, then, that had grown and grown and grown until it became the very twisting tumult of hell and bounded all of creation, that far dragon. That it was said that Thor could not fight again until the very end of time. But as Thor said, "Look, I don't like waiting for my birthday. It's a month next Tuesday, in case you're wondering. Let alone waiting till the end of time. The end of flipping time? Just a battle with a newt I once could have slain with my gloved hand? It's not on. Why should I have to wait? Wait that long to fight my fiercest foe? I might have got off the boil by then. I'm in peak fighting form." And so he threatened, worried and threatened, until a thought as bright as lightning came across his mind. And biding his time, and missing one of the greatest piss-ups in all of Valhalla. "I hope this is worth it," he thought to himself. He crept out very early one morning. At that time, the three shadowy figures, the Norns, who Odin said were almost always up by the one tree, the great yew, even if Thor could not always see them. It was that time then that those three forms went to the well, and then down briefly to the roots of the tree, to water them, to nourish it, to keep it from being over-gnawed by those creatures that gnaw at the roots. At that time then, Thor crept up to the workstation of the Norns, where he never went. And although he could not really see their looms and nothing of their design, he saw the skeins of fate, bright or black, and he thought to himself, "Well, I'm going to not want a black one. I'm going to want a bright one, because that will look like the water I am going to throw it into." And so he saw a skein of fate, blue and silver. And as he was creeping away, something caught his eye. It was a sharp needle. For the Norns used the sharpest of needles to hook the thread onto the loom. The needle that was, some said, Odin anyway, Thor didn't know, was the top of the tooth of Ymir himself. And he thought to himself, "Well, that will be strong indeed." And he stole the needle. And going back to his hall, briefly, packing a few things, he took the needle, and with that holy hand of his, that glove that could not be beaten by any task in this world, he bent the needle on his knee, straining and stretching. Oh my gosh, look, the glove isn't quite what it was. I can still hold my hammer. And it doesn't matter much. If I see the Midgard serpent, I would have fighted my worst foe then and there. It doesn't need to last much longer, thought Thor. For it was true. The glove seemed to be worn by the bending of the needle of fate. And then Thor started to leave Valhalla. It was still very, very early. And he suddenly thought to himself, "Now I'm going to need a rod." And he remembered that Odin had told him to repair the shield wall of Valhalla, of Gladsheim, for one of the planks of the iron wood that could never be quite replaced had got loose. And he thought to himself, well, those staves I cut myself. They will make great rods. And they won't break. They'll give me the flex I need to catch the worm. And so, the early god, thinking, I really will catch the worm, took that part of the plank wall that had become loose, and slowly, in a disguise, crept down to Middle-earth, to the very western shore of Norway, where there dwelt at that time a mighty giant, as tall as a mountain he was. And he had the reputation of being the only creature that was capable of sailing the far western ocean and going mid-ocean, and there he would fish for the fiercest of foes, whales, or even stray kraken who had come from their kingdom of the east. And Thor went before him and said, I am here now. Do you require help, my man? And the giant thought, oh no, not another one. For it was true, he regularly lost crew members there in the Western Ocean, where they could not survive the swell and tumult. You are too small, my fine little fellow. I have no use for you. And Thor, in his disguise as a mortal man, looked the giant in the face and said, try me. And the giant said, come then, and took him then to his hall, where he kept his floats. Now those floats, 9 in number, were made of thunderbolt iron that had fallen, some said, from the meteors that fell upon the ice before even Ymir was dead. And the giant had them in the forms of great globes with hooks upon the top. He used them to weight his thread when fishing in the deepest abyssal plain of the ocean. And he said, in a voice cunning, here, catch. And he threw one of those globes full in the face of Thor, meaning to kill the god there and then. But Thor, just with his great glove, reached out and caught it. Caught! Any more? I like to get a job over. And the giant said, all right. And picking up 3, he threw them full in the face of Thor. 1, 2, 3! And one by one. Ha ha! This is fun! Thor caught them. And now there were 4 caught in the boat. And the giant was losing his temper. He pulled back the stay that held them and rushed them all forward, and 5 more fell upon the head of the thunder god. And the giant thought, well, that would be the end of him. Thor, faster than time itself, reached out with his hand again and again, caught them all and stashed them in the boat and said, wow, that was fun! So much fun! I knew this would be a great trip. Are we ready to go now? The giant thought to himself, he might be little, but he is stronger than I thought. All right, we will go. And taking a little food and some water, they sailed out, off into the deep ocean, far further west than boats normally could even think of going, to the great abyssal plain, there beyond the memory of man. And the giant then stopped the boat and said, all right, whoever you are, all right, it is time to fish. Here. And he took his 3rd best rod and a hook and put on 2 of his floats, of his weights, and said to Thor, now fish. And using a little bit of the dried meat, Thor threw the line into the deep ocean. And in a matter of no time, he had hooked something, and flexing his muscles, he pulled it up and up and up, and it was strong indeed. He pulled it up, flipped it onto the boat. It was the great white whale himself, largest in the ocean. And the giant caught it and said, "Ha ha! This is just the bait I need. Thank you, my fine little fellow." And he patted Thor on the head. It was all Thor could do to keep his temper. And then the giant took his best rod, and he took the well, he pulled it inside out, and he put in it a great hook of his own, and as many weights as he ever used, 6 in number. And he threw the line out, and waited, and waited, and waited. And suddenly it snagged, and then the giant pulled up the line, pulling, while Thor counterweighted on the back of the other end of the boat, stopping it tossing too much, for the giant had something immense, and soon the water twisted in tumult like a million legs were coming out. Tentacles of some mighty creature, and suddenly, in a jerk, the giant pulled up the Kraken itself. With 2 great limpid eyes that looked on the god and the giant with utter hate. And the giant flipped it back, meaning to crush Thor with its tentacles. But Thor reached out his gloved hand, and he caught the creature and crushed it there and then. And he said, "Thank you, my man. You have caught the bait I needed." And in the Kraken, he put the hook. And then he put the hook on the thread the Ski of Fate he had stolen, and put the thread on the plank of the shield wall of Asgard, and casted the line out, and down and down and down it went, below the abyssal plain, down to the very depths of hell itself, that lies beyond the root of all things. For it had 9 weights on it, enough weights to take you to the very bottom of the world. And Thor smiled as he felt the Kraken fall, and chuckled when he heard and he felt the line snag, and he knew he'd caught something. Then roared with delight as all his muscles strained, and he started to pull the line up and up and up and up. And as he pulled the line up, the sea boiled in a twisted tumult, and the giant, fearing, caught hold of the gunwale. And it seemed to him the world was turning dark, the sun was getting cold, and he looked to the north, and he saw Thrym was strapping on his great gold shield. And then the giant looked down into the water, and it seemed that something was coming, and Thor pulled up all the more, all the harder, and then the giant looked south, and there he saw Surt was getting his great sword, a poisoned brand to burn the gods, ready. And on the far ice wind he heard a distant "Ow!" as all the great stretching at his bounds. Down into the water. Something was coming. He saw 2 great eyes looking at him. Eyes at the end of time, at the very death of things. And in utter terror, he took out his dagger and tried to cut the thread. Thor was pulling the thread up. No dagger of the giant could catch it. And then the giant caught sight on Thor's belt of a dagger. Now, this dagger had been made by Thor, by the dwarves themselves, and it could cut anything at all. And by chance he had worn it, for he always wore it on his belt, and the giant pulled out the dagger and cut the thread, even though it broke the dagger in two. And the thread cut, the great creature sunk down with all the weights. It sunk down, and Thor jumped back in the boat, and that part of the plank wall of heaven he had carried went up into the air and fell down into the ocean as well. And then Thor turned to the giant and said, "Why did you do that?" The giant looked at him without fear and said, Who would you have? Whoever you are, the end of time happened now. And now is not the time to quarrel. Now is the time to save our lives. It was true. A great hurricane had blown on, and the wave was twisting in tumult. For both Grim had gone back to his halls, and Surt back to his abyss. The wolf had quieted down. Here in the west, the hurricane was blowing, and so Thor, the giant, barely managed the craft, sailing it at last across the storm winds, back to the western shore of Iceland. And when they got it back to their home fjord, Thor got out, and he pulled out his hammer, which had been in his belt, and he said, "And now, my friend, I want you to give an account of yourself. Why did you take me away from my true game?" Would you have had the end of time happen now? Do you not feel the one eye is on you, and it is the eye of fury? And it was just at that moment Thor felt it, the fierce eye of Odin, looking at him with wild fury. And the giant turned his back and went to his hall, and Thor crept back to heaven. And what Odin said, and what revenge he enacted, I'm afraid I do not know. But this I do know, that fate will be all the darker, and the end of time will be all the sooner, for that single thread that Thor treacherously stole, and the design of the Norns will be all the simpler, and the gods' doom all the harder for the hook he stole. And as to the shield wall of Asgard,